Hello and welcome. My name is David Karofsky, and I am a consultant with the Family Business Consulting Group. I am here today with Stephanie Brun de Pontet, who is also a consultant with the Family Business Consulting Group. Today, we wanted to share some thoughts about the importance of a board during times of crisis and the value that they can bring to an organization. And so Stephanie and I today are just going to have a quick conversation about some of the different things that boards can do during times like this. So Stephanie, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for doing this, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stephanie, to kick it off, how are companies utilizing existing boards today during difficult times or a time of crisis?
I mean, I think all of the clients that I've spoken to in the past several weeks are just really leaning into their board. I think people are realizing that they need the perspective of all the different expertise that they have at the table with them. I think people are hungry. They're really craving for some perspective. You know, how are other people handling this? How are we navigating? What do we need to do first, right? It's a very disorienting sensation for all of us, and that's true for leaders. And then leaders are shouldering so many difficult decisions. And so I think the board has been a critical resource in terms of helping leaders to prioritize, helping them to kind of source ideas and resources that they need to get through this crisis. And of course, obviously it depends on the client situation. Some companies, you know, are in a position where they actually have a lot of work to do because they're maybe responding to this crisis. But most of our clients are probably experiencing much more of a downturn and trying to make very difficult decisions about potentially furloughing people or really scaling back operations, managing safety. So these are all sorts of concerns that that leaders are managing, and a board is a great resource to help focus the team on those critical tasks.
And whether you're a board of directors or a board of advisors, I think both can apply here, that you really have a team of resources that the leadership can turn to, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think, you know, I mean, again, when you have uncertainty, the team that, you know, thoughtful, smart business leaders who really know your business, so they've got that experience, can help because they're ahead of the learning curve.
Right.
You don't need to bring them up to speed. They know where you're at. They know what your financial situation is, you know, they know what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And so they're in a position to really provide sound counsel and to provide confidence and continuity, right? I mean, the example we typically have seen prior to this emergency will be if the leader has a health emergency, him or herself, right? And so you could have a vacuum in the leadership role. The board can really step in a crisis like that and lend support and really help the management team figure out kind of what do we do next. And so, you know, having that emergency resource is just tremendously valuable.
Now, we know not every family business has a formal board, even board of directors, even board of advisors. But often, you know, in the evolution of family business, sometimes they start with a family-only board.
Yep.
What would you say to some of those family businesses out there that may not have that formal structure yet?
I think it's really important to think about who do you know that you can really turn to for advice in your network. I mean, and it may be your family board, but you may want to go beyond that. You may have people, you may want to talk to your bankers, your lawyer, folks that we might not encourage you to put on your board, but are still trusted advisors and key counsel to you in your company, and can be a bit of an ad hoc, right? And I think you were talking, David, before about a situation with a client where that was a little bit the advice that you gave, right?
Yeah, he doesn't have a formal board in place right now. And so I said to him, I said, you know, you've got some really great ideas here. You don't know whether you want to implement them or not. Who are 2 or 3 or 4 key advisors, whether it is a banker advised, you know, an accountant, or just a good friend of yours that may be a good business person that you can get to on a consistent basis to talk to? Because you got to be able to talk through some of these things, because it can be lonely if you're the only one thinking of these ideas. And so, yeah,
Right.
I think that's a good point.
Right. And I think, you know, I mean, obviously that's not as good as a board with folks who already know your business and are as optimally well-versed as your directors or your advisors are. But yeah, you can't let perfection be the enemy of good enough, right? So sometimes if you're dealing with a crisis, like surround yourself with the resources that you have available. That's the entrepreneurial way. And so, yeah, definitely don't leave yourself without that. I was talking to somebody early last week who was talking about putting together a board, and his thinking was, I need somebody to brainstorm with. I need smart people that I
Yes.
can just sort of like gut check some of my ideas and initiatives. So yeah, definitely surround yourself with those people if you don't currently have a board.
Particularly right now when we're all kind of in a little bit of a state of isolation.
Right.
We don't get that back and forth. We can't just walk down the hall to my CFO and say, hey, what do you think about this or that? So you've got to actively seek that connection with people.
For
Yeah,
sure. Exactly.
absolutely. Stephanie, what would you say are the top 2, 3 items, issues, challenges, or opportunities that boards are really talking about right now in this kind of difficult time?
What I'm hearing from boards that I've worked with is their first priority is around safety, right? So they're really trying to understand that the crisis that we're in is around health. They are minding all of their stakeholders and trying to think about what can we do to protect our people, and ensure that we put the resources towards that first and foremost. Second, most critical thing that I'm hearing a lot of people talk about is cash, right? I mean, there's a lot of work, a lot of businesses have had to shut down because they're not considered a part of essential services, and in their state they basically cannot be operating, and so that has ground their operations to a complete halt, which obviously brings the revenue cash inflows to a complete halt, and there's still some fixed costs there. So a lot of focus on cash flow. What are some intelligent and thoughtful cutbacks that need to be enacted so that we're making the difficult but smart decisions in a timely manner, right? So I think that that discipline, those conversations at a board, are really important. And then the third piece that I hear a lot about is pivoting, right? A little bit from defense to offense. So where are there opportunities? Are there things that we can retool or do differently? And trying to starting now, this is, maybe in the past week, I've started to hear people talking about this is, okay, when we eventually come out of this, how do we come out of this stronger? So thinking about the opportunities for innovation, et cetera, even in the context of all of this crisis.
I agree with all of those. There's a couple of others I'd add on. I think one, from a board perspective, is to look at some contingency planning.
For sure.
You're already doing it from the business perspective, but also, unfortunately, to be able to have the difficult discussion around contingency planning in the event that a key leader in the business were to become ill.
Yep.
Just to understand that we want to be there for that family, no question, but we also want to limit the impact of the business in the event that someone should get sick.
Yep.
So I think that's an important discussion. With respect to pivoting, I agree with you 100%. And companies are doing it right now, real time. But also, when they do come out of this, can they be a little leaner and meaner?
Yep.
Even operationally, not just what opportunities they might find in the marketplace from a product or service perspective, but how are they going to run the operations of the company? I think people today are finding the use of technology like this, for example, in video conferencing. They may not need the office space they necessarily had before. Or work from home, I have a feeling that the work from home concept might take off a little bit more than traditionally because of the forcing function that we have today.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely true.
Yep. How often would you recommend that boards be meeting today?
I mean, again, leveraging technology, to your point, I think boards can be doing this kind of a Zoom conference and probably should be touching base once a week. It doesn't have to be a lengthy, strategic deep dive, but an hour, a minimum of an hour, just kind of catching up what's hot, how can we be helpful, et cetera. I think that that consistency of communication, I think, is something that you need to see throughout the system. And I think it starts at the top with your board.
And building on the topics that we think are most important to be talking, you could almost have a standing agenda. What's the state of the safety situation within the company right now? What's the state of cash flow? What opportunities are you looking at? What key decisions need to be made? And it can be just a very simple, almost standing agenda. Let's hit these key things. Is there a dashboard we want to take a quick look at?
Yep.
And then we're on our way. But having those check-ins, I think, is important. I agree with you.
Yeah, and actually I was listening to a webinar earlier today where they were talking about, we often do a lot of strategic planning, or you have, key performance indicators in our businesses. you might need to really take a minute with your board to think about, okay, what we previously had may not be relevant right now, right? What is it that we need to be focused on, and what's
Yep.
our dashboard for the now? And tracking that, like you said, on a regular basis with a standing agenda for the sake of simplicity. I think that's a great.
It's funny. I was on a call yesterday with a client, and I said, what are you working on right now? He goes, we're unbelievably efficient because we're really only focused on the things that are absolutely most critical, which is really, it's the 80-20 rule, right? Focusing on the top 20% is still driving 80% of your business, and that's what people are focusing on right now. And some of my clients are getting some efficiencies out of doing that.
Yep. No, and again, on that webinar, they were talking about, pretty much every business, there's businesses that are unfortunately not going to survive this crisis just because the hit is going to just be too severe. And then there's those outliers that are, they're going gangbusters. But most businesses are kind of in the middle. And then all of those businesses will come out of this either stronger or weaker. And I think, again, with your board, you have to push yourself to think about, how are we going to be stronger on the other side of this? I mean, there may still be lots of existential crises we need to overcome to get to that other side, but if we have enough strength, and a lot of our clients' family businesses tend to be financially conservative, right? So they're often in a relatively stronger position maybe than their peers in their industry. So there's good hope for them down the road, even through a very difficult journey. But how are we positioning ourselves for strength?
I also think, I think this is going to be an opportunity for the board to reevaluate itself and say, where do we need to make sure we're spending our time, and is it appropriate for us to even shift how we're spending our time going forward, even when they come out of this?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So a couple more questions. Let's talk about communication, which we know is critical, period. But in times of stress, communication is even more important. What are some of the things that you're making recommendations to your clients and to the boards that you work with respect to communication?
I mean, exactly as you're saying, David. I think you really cannot be over communicating in this context. You need to be clear on what your message is. And again, I think when you look at some of the business leaders, or some of the governors or what have you, that get out there and speak the truth, right? I think it is incredibly powerful for your people, for you to be willing to tell them the hard truths of what you're facing, and share some hope and clarity on what are the steps that we're taking to address this hard truth. So I think being really clear on your messaging, and if you're not a great communicator, getting some support. Maybe you have a board director who can help you with kind of, how do I refine that message to strike that tone, because it's a hard tone, it's a hard balance to strike, to be honest and clear-eyed about the challenges in front of us, and provide some hope for people that we will get to the other side, and here's what we're all collectively doing, and also communicating about some of the shared sacrifices that folks are doing. Sometimes the family's playing an important role in that, in our client families. And so I think communicating about that, communicating to your employees, communicating to your vendors, communicating to your customers, getting ahead of the curve, right? I had clients communicate to me and say, hey, we are really in a crisis mode. We're going to need to scale back a little bit what we've been doing. And, that gave me an opportunity to reach back out and show some support, but so professional, right? What an appropriate thing to do, to just tell people, just honestly, where are you at?
Be above board.
It builds so much trust, which I think is, kind of the critical ingredient to help the team really kind of gel together and move forward together. Is investing in that trust is really important.
Yeah, and let's not forget the shareholders. It's really critical to make sure we're communicating to the shareholder group as well, that we know in family businesses, sometimes, we have all ranges of types of shareholders, active shareholders, more passive shareholders, and they're all going to be wondering what's going on with the business. So let's make sure we're communicating to our shareholders as well as to what's happening in the business, decisions that are being made, and possibly even impacts to them with respect to things like distributions. It's important that they know what's going on.
Right, and give them advance, as quickly as you can, communicate that expectation so that they can adjust. their own planning. I think that's really important. And it's easy to forget, or not forget, but you have so many urgent things right in front of you, right? So it can be easy to not think about the family members that you often might communicate with on a quarterly basis or twice a year or whatever, at an annual or gatherings of the family. You need to be proactive and reaching out to people now, so that they are not left wondering.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stephanie, one last question. Leadership. We all know it can be lonely at the top at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And how can the leaders consistently make sure they're utilizing their boards? Some of the things we've been talking about already, but anything else you want to add in with respect to leadership and how tough it is at the top sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a tremendous burden on the shoulders of leaders as you're making these really difficult, just kind of gut-wrenching decisions. I think that's one of the huge benefits of a board, is that, again, you're surrounded by hopefully peers for whom you have a lot of respect. And many of them are kind of in your shoes, or they've recently been in shoes similar to yours. And so they have empathy. So I think, hopefully you have a board, and if you don't have a board, you have a council of sort of informal trusted advisors
Yeah.
that you can be vulnerable with, right? And you can share with them what's truly keeping you up at night and what you're worried about, because you need to be able to unpack some of that, to get the support that you need emotionally to keep yourself healthy, right? And you need your head to be fully in the game, and in order to do that, that kind of empathetic support is a tremendous value and resource that a board can bring to you. And hopefully, again, you have that kind of relationship with your directors and advisors.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely, I'll call it the sleep factor, that
Yeah.
the boards can help manage leadership through, and that's great. Well, Stephanie, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. It's been a real joy to kind of talk about boards and the use of boards during times of crisis, so to speak. And for those who tuned in, thank you very much for watching. If you want to learn more about the Family Business Consulting Group, you can check out our website at www.thefbcg.com. Thanks.
Thank you.